نبقى الآن مع الندوة الأولى لهذه الأمسية، وهي ندوة باللغة الإنجليزية بعنوان أثر حركة التضامن العالمية على القضية الفلسطينية والدور المطلوب فلسطينياً وعربياً تجاهها. أدعو إلى المنصة الإعلامي القدير الإعلامي الفلسطيني الدكتور خالد الترعاني.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It is a pleasure and an honor to take part yet in the 17th round of this glorious gathering of Palestinians from all over the European continent. This strong expression of solidarity and continuity between Palestinians in their countries of diaspora and Palestinians who remain in Palestine, with one strong and clear message to all: that Palestine endures in our hearts, and that our connection with the homeland can never and will never be weakened by the distance in time and in space. Now, in that spirit, it is really a pleasure to welcome this distinguished panel here of experts on the Palestinian issue. And we will delve right into the heart of the matter, discussing the role of solidarity organizations and the solidarity movement with the Palestinian cause throughout the world, and particularly in Europe. And with me on this panel is Beatrice Stefanini from the Palestine Return Center. He's originally Italian and now British. My name is Khalid Turani, and I came from the United States, if you cannot tell by my accent, I guess. And I have on my left Mr. Rabi' Azada, and he is the vice mayor of the city of Aarhus in Denmark here. And to my left is my dear friend, Dr. Azam التميمي, an internationally renowned figure and expert on the Islamic movement and on the issue of Palestine. So without further ado, we're going to talk about the solidarity movement. We know in the example of South Africa that the South African struggle for freedom and for liberation from an apartheid oppressive regime where they were ruled by the minority, despite all the successes that they had on the ground, if it was not for the pervasive solidarity movement throughout the world, standing with the people of South Africa. It was the policies of Ronald Reagan in the 80s and Margaret Thatcher that basically was nullifying all of their achievement. And until and after people of conscience and people of principle in the West stood up and said, no more, we're not going to support a regime that is apartheid, was the apartheid regime in South Africa defeated. And we see the growing momentum that the BDS movement and solidarity movement is moving with the Palestinians and their desire for liberation. And we see that as an example really to be followed of what happened in South Africa to be duplicated in Palestine. So I would start on my right-hand side with Petros. As a European, as an Italian, and as a person who is very concerned with the issue of Palestine, if I can ask, how would you assess the status or the state of solidarity movement in Europe with the Palestinian people?
Thank you very much, Khaled, for that very insightful introduction. To answer your question on the status of the global solidarity movement in Europe, I think everyone would agree that it is very strong, and there has been many successes of the global solidarity movement and of the broader BDS campaign, of the lobbying of Palestinian NGOs in European countries, and we see that from the we see that also from the huge efforts put into by the Israeli government to clamp down on the on solidarity activities, on activism, through lawfare, through even we see in the US through laws to clamp down on BDS activities in individual states. And one issue I wanted to also talk about, the importance of, for the solidarity movement to not only the importance to be in solidarity with the Palestinians and not to argue for them, which at times can be counterproductive, and there is a difference between campaigning for someone and being in solidarity with. So it is important to always, for us Europeans and those in the West, to put at the center the voices of the Palestinians and to be guided by them as well. And on that hand, there needs to, for the Palestinian political movement, the Deliberation Project, also there needs to be, as you may be familiar, there needs to be an improvement in terms of a unified vision going forward.
Well, this is pretty good, and I wanted to ask Rabia, as in your position, are you an elected official or are you a political appointee?
I'm elected.
You're elected. So here you are, an elected person of brown skin like the rest of us, and as we heard from the lady who's a member of the parliament, that there is an increasing nationalistic sentiment that is more on the right wing of the political spectrum. So how do you see the solidarity movement with Palestine in a country like Denmark that is known for social justice and known to be really a haven for accepting others and accepting different lifestyles, but yet it seems there is an increase in the nationalism and really demagoguery, if you will, but yet at the same time you are elected in a city like Aarhus. So can you explain to us this dichotomy here between, is it good or is it bad?
I think it's very important that you look at the Palestinians and Palestine case as a question about justice. If you look at the different agenda, that's different parties and different politicians and different people who are working for human rights, they will say, okay, it's about freedom. If we are very clear about our agenda and the strategy, and the solidarity movement who are working for that are very clear about what it's about. It's about communication. I think then you will get many Danish, also politicians, who will believe in that case and will fight for that. And I know it's not easy right now. I'm one of the politicians who actually asked to boycott products coming from the settlements. But the problem is actually that right now many people are mixing many things together, and that's why I think the civil society have a very important role in that, in trying to communicate what the Palestinian case is about. And so I think it's not very clear in the Western for many people, and that's very important. For instance, I think this is a very good conference, but who we actually need is more Danish participating. And when we are arranging a lot of things about Palestine. What I also say to many of the Palestinians, try to make partnership with Danish society, because it's needed. It's not only a question for Palestinians, it's actually a humanitarian, it's a case which is very important for everyone if they understand what it's about. So it's about communication.
It's a human rights issue that you think is going to resonate with the Danish people if it is communicated properly. Well, Dr. Azam, you really have spent your whole life working on the Palestinian issue and working within the Muslim community's context and trying to reach out to the West. I really think of no one, at least in the UK, among the Muslim community who are, if you will, immigrant community, who can communicate better with the West than you do. Where do you see the problem in Denmark and in Sweden and probably in Italy, in many of the European countries, where we attend conferences and we find that there is a disconnect, if you will, between our community and the larger community. So while we have solidarity, sometimes that solidarity operates in a silo and really independent of our influence. They are in solidarity because they want to be in solidarity, not always because we were successful in reaching out to them. In some cases we have, but for the most part it is organic and it is happening with them. Where is the disconnect, if you will, first of all, if you agree with that assessment, and if you do, where is the disconnect between our community or the immigrant community and its ability to connect to the indigenous one?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think among those who are familiar with the conflict in the region, those who are interested in knowing about it, there is a high level of solidarity. There's no doubt about it. The Palestinian issue today is actually a cause for many people around the world, people who are anti-imperialist, anti-colonialism. But the problem we face in the West in general, and in Europe in particular, is that the Zionist project is European in its origins. So the Europeans, many of them, except for the people who do actually know about the cause and therefore sympathize with it, there is a large proportion of people in the West who still believe the occupation of Palestine was a fair compensation to the Jews for the persecution they suffered in Europe. There was a European problem, and the Europeans wanted to solve that problem at the expense of somebody else, which happens here to be the Palestinians. The other problem is that our national liberation movement, represented in the PLO and in the Fatah movement in particular, sold out on us. There was a time in the 60s, part of the 70s, when many people, especially the left around the world, supported the cause of Palestine, went to PLO camps, they joined the PLO. I went to Japan, for instance. I went to South Africa. I went to various parts of the world where people asked me, what has happened to your liberation movement? There was a time when people who sympathized with Palestine believed, as we Palestinians believed, that Zionism was an evil. But when the PLO accepted the Oslo Agreement and decided to exchange land for peace, as they claimed, many people lost interest. And the challenge we face today in the global solidarity movement is to go back to the issue of Zionism. Zionism as a racist, anti-human movement. Because if you talk only about occupation, if you talk about refugees, somebody can come up with whatever weird solution for this problem. But if you talk about a racist movement that is anti-human, as embodied today by the Netanyahu government and by the right wing in Israel, as well as in the United States of America, the only solution is to boycott Israel, to join the struggle against it, and to express full solidarity with the Palestinian people. So we need to go back and define what the conflict is about.
Well, we know that the root cause of all evil in Palestine is really the occupation. Now, the tool of the occupation is a Zionist movement, or if you will, the political vehicle of the occupation is the Zionist movement. Now, you talk about the PLO and that the PLO sold the Palestinians down the river, which I agree with you, after Oslo. However, the BDS movement came probably 15 years after Oslo. So it seems that as the Israeli occupation is becoming more brutal and more oppressive of the Palestinians, and the more Palestinians are willing to negotiate and willing to accommodate the occupation and all its desires, as we see with the Palestinian Authority right now, what we see there is a rise in the global movement of solidarity with the Palestinians. So it seems that the fact that the Palestinian liberation movement, the PLO particularly, and Fatah in particular, in specific rather, have sold us down the river, but the BDS movement and the solidarity movement is growing. So how can we explain that? So it must be that the solidarity movement is independent of the fact that the Palestinian liberation movement have sold the Palestinians after Oslo. So, Dr. Azam, and then I would like to hear from...
of course it is independent. I mean, that's the reason for the success of BDS. The BDS is not part of the political game. It's a purely humanitarian response to a most brutal occupation. And I would really recommend the writings of Jonathan Cook, a brilliant British journalist who writes about developments within Israel. And in one of his recent articles, he spoke about the change in the nature of Israel from being, in the beginning, a left-wing sort of Zionism into an extreme right-wing Zionism that actually leaves no room for anybody to sympathize with it if you understand what's going on the ground. Now, had BDS been under the influence of any political movement, whether Palestinian or Arab, it probably would have succumbed. It would have sold out.
It would have flattered.
And that's why it is the most prized thing about BDS is its independence.
Okay. Rabi', you had something to add to that.
I agree in somewhat what has been said, but I think it's also about I think PDS has been doing a very, very great work, and it's getting success in many countries in the world, and I think many people is getting aware about what's happening actually in Palestine, but we still need a lot. The civil society, which this debate is about, is what's everyone living in the Western Union, which role we are playing. And I think we can do our parts much better, because we have the most justice cause, but we are maybe not the best advocate for that. And what we actually need is to try to rethink the way we are working with the Palestinian case, with communicating the Palestinian suffering. And I think we use a lot of communication intern among the Palestinians, for instance. What we need is actually that we need that platform. We are in Europe, in the Western, actually to get our hands to our neighbors and friends and work more together with the solidarity movement in Europe. And I believe there is a lot of solidarity movement in Europe who's actually Western people who are working maybe much better than we can do. And that's what actually we need. In that time, it will be much easier also to boycott and to understand who the Israeli, or who is the Israeli regime is actually.
Petro, then I will come to you and ask you, are you as a European better equipped and maybe have a more credible voice advocating for the rights of Palestinians and calling for the boycott of Israel than a Palestinian immigrant would be? The majority of the community are immigrants, and I see some indigenous now who can be really very well spoken and who can speak from a local, if you will, an organic or Danish paradigm if we're talking about Denmark. So is a European solidarity movement more credible in advocating for the Palestinians in a European context than a Palestinian would be?
I will try to answer your question, also touching up on some of the points that have been raised. I don't think you can separate them, you know, the two solidarity movements. I think it is one and it is mixed. And to answer your question, if as a European, obviously, I can have a better impact on other Europeans to speak up for Palestinians. But I agree with what has been said about the need for Palestinians in the diaspora to reach out more through these events, to bring in Europeans. I also agree with Dr. Azam Tamimi that Europe is completely still allied with Israel. And although we might agree that the solidarity movement is very strong, it has largely failed to translate into actual democratic power with the European governments. You see the rise of the far-right governments in Europe are all allied with Netanyahu. And we have one exception at the moment with the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn, which some say his support for Palestine really helped him to win the first leadership election. And so I think, yeah, that there needs to be this translation from a strong solidarity, which is a mixed movement, into more democratic power through governments, so that it is not just the individual campaigns against this or that corporation, but it is actually the governments that are sanctioning Israel, that are ending their arms trade, that are ending the cooperation with the Israeli government.
So basically you're saying to move that solidarity movement from being a very popular or a populist movement into more of a party-aligned movement that is going to win election, win seats, and then make it as part of their platform to stand up for the human rights of the Palestinian people. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I'm not sure how that could translate into actual political parties in Europe.
Like you said, with the Corbyn
Yes.
and the Labour Party in the UK,
Yes.
and the fact that the party, in part or partially, won the election because of their position
Yes.
and their stance on the
Yes.
solidarity movement.
Yeah, I mean also that it is related to having to defeat these right-wing reactionary forces all around Europe and the rest of the world. And this is part of, it is not about forming new political movements, it is about defeating these right-wing political governments that we have at the moment.
Which really transcends just the Palestinian solidarity movement. For Europe to defeat an ultra-nationalist agenda, that is really a European issue, but it is also a human rights issue that is going to affect solidarity movements with all oppressed people all over the world, I believe. Dr. Azam Tamimi, I wanted to switch gear on you, if you will. Now, as there is a rise in the global solidarity movement with the Palestinian people, we see that the position of some of the Arab countries who have been really in the forefront as nations and even sometimes as governments in supporting the Palestinians and their desire to gain freedom and liberate themselves from the Israeli occupation. Recently, a foreign minister, an Arab foreign minister, addressed in an Arab country, addressed Arab foreign ministers and told them Israelis have security concerns and we must calm their fears. On the other hand, I'm sure you have seen the foreign policy report where they did a full expose, if you will, that the strongest lobbyists for Islamophobes in the West are Arab governments. And we see that people who used to be a pariah literally a pariah in Western society, particularly in the United States. The likes of Daniel Pipes and Stephen Emerson and even Clifford May now are being hosted by Arab countries. Now they are working as advisors to some of the Arab regimes. So we see a rise in the global solidarity movement with the Palestinians. From the Arab world, we're seeing actually the opposite of that, and really the fostering and the support to those who are most extremist in their opposition to the Palestinians and their rights.
Arab governments paid lip service to the Palestinian cause for many decades. But I think a major shift happened the last decade. The eruption of the Arab Spring revolutions pushed some of the Arab governments, which previously seemed, at least seemed on the face of it, to be sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, to enter into an alliance with Israel. Israel, as well as the Arab regimes who are despotic and corrupt, feel that they have a joint enemy now. The Arab the Arab people's demand for democratization threatens those Arab regimes and threatens Israel at the same time. I personally now believe firmly that Palestine may never be liberated until the Arabs are liberated. So long as the Arabs are shackled with despotism and with corruption, Israel will continue to reign and will continue to do whatever it can get away with. And today there is Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, the foreign minister is the Omani foreign minister, the one you referred to, and Egypt, Sisi. Sisi, who toppled the first ever democratically elected civilian president in the history of Egypt, is a Zionist ally, is a Zionist serviceman. And you see, this is what's new today. And we need to take this into consideration when we endeavor to strengthen our solidarity movement. We need to press on civil societies, and we need to recognize who are the real enemies. But if you permit me, there is another major challenge that faces us, and especially here in Europe, probably to some extent also in America, and that is the ambiguity of the Palestinian discourse regarding what the Palestinians want. What do we want, Palestinians? Of course, the Israelis today will tell you they no longer care for the two-state solution. It's finished, it's over. Analysts would tell you this. It used to be land for peace, it used to be two-state solution, whatever. You see, what really matters, I mean, and I would tell you from what we've seen today, that none of the Palestinians in this hall, none of the Palestinians in the refugee camps cares about the two-state solution or about Oslo or about any such compromise. We want every bit of Palestine back. We want to be liberated from Zionism in every part of Palestine and even in the Arab world. And unless we Palestinians have a clear discourse, unless our language is clear, unless the world, the people here in Denmark, the people in the Netherlands, the people in France, the people in Britain, the people all over the world hear from us a clear message. My mother was born in Beersheba. We want to go to Bi'r al-Saba. We want to go to Yafa. We want to go to Haifa. We want to go to Akka. We want to go to Safad. Mahmoud Abbas doesn't want his mother's house in Safad. He can go to hell because every other Palestinian wants to go to his mother and father's land. And this is the discourse we need to have and we need to press.
Well, this whole, I certainly appreciate your passion, and this whole conference is about the Palestinians' right of return, and I think, as it is stated in bold letters, that the Palestinians desire to go to their towns and to their villages and to the cities from which they and their parents and their grandparents were expelled from, whether it's in 1948 or 1967. Now, if Palestinians express that desire, it seems that the West, and some even in the solidarity movement, will say, oh, hands off. And sometimes, probably, you were talking about that the Palestinians need to have a clear message. You also stated that. But with a clear message, if a Palestinian said, I wanted to go back to my town and to my village in Haifa, in Akka, in Yafa, for me in Tabariya, would that turn off that solidarity movement? Not that I would care as a Palestinian. If you're going to have solidarity with me on your terms, then that is not solidarity. You have to have solidarity with me on my own terms, basically for me to gain back my rights. How do you see it?
Actually, it's also about to understand what's the right of return it's about. The right of return is not about to come back to your village. The right of return is about to come back to your village and have the right also to move in everywhere. And you have the right to come to whole Palestine, the historical Palestine. The right to return is not to right to return to, for instance, Hebron, or to return to Al Khalil or any other places in the Palestinian in the 1967. It's about actually to come back to your village. It's what's the right to return, and this should also be very clear. When you ask a Palestinian the right of return, I will say, okay, my right to return to Akka. Akka, it's actually my parents and my grandparents. And that's my right to return to, and the compensation is not even if it's actually with the compensation, because we have been suffering. But I just want to add something. That's true that the Arabic leaders have been cheating us for many years, but they have been having an agenda that's now it's more clear, exposed. I think I've been seeing a very recently a survey from the United States, which said that the supporter of Israel in the Republicans is getting much lesser, and the support of Israel it's becoming about 70%. It has been used to be very, very higher, and the Democratic is about maybe 50%. And that tells us that sometimes if we are very, very clear about who is Israel among, who is the alliance in the region between the Egyptian Sisi and the Saudi Arabian and Emirates and Israel, about that coalition, I think many people, they will support the Palestinians, because they will see. Before, it has been very difficult for Palestinians to say, support us, because they will say dictatorships and Arabic leaders. But now, today, it's Israel actually who are working with that. We are working for freedom. We are working with people who want to be liberated.
Yes, indeed. Well, then that will take me to Petros. You work for a center that is called after the Palestinians' right of return, the PRC, the Palestine Return Center in London. Then from now on, I mean, from here forward, where do you see the global solidarity movement going, and what are the hindrances to it even accelerating and expanding further in the support for the Palestinian people?
So it's a good question. I mean, there needs to be a continued, picking up to what was mentioned earlier, a continued need to connect the struggles. Connect the struggles for the solidarity movement is massively important, to show that they are not separate struggles, and that the Palestinian liberation movement is connected to other indigenous causes, whether it is in the United States or elsewhere. There has been a growing black Palestinian solidarity growing in the United States. And I believe that this connection of the solidarity movement between Palestinians and with the solidarity movement in Europe has to build on the fact that there's huge alliances between Israel and European countries, and in the US they share Israel trains American police.
So if you were to suggest, let's say, to the globe, even though it is not homogeneous, if you were to suggest two things to the global solidarity movement, and say, if you do these two things, probably you will have more success even though there are a lot of interest and interconnected economical exchanges with the Israeli occupation. So what would be the two things that you would advise the global solidarity movement? And that question will go to everybody on the panel.
I think the one important one that we have touched on, and it's been said that not being a political movement has been helpful, but perhaps that is the biggest dilemma going forward, is whether the solidarity movement has to have a political project or an end project in terms of coming out, perhaps. I think it should be the right time to fully come out for a one-state solution and to campaign on that position, and yet to continue to reach out, I think, to European and Western civil society is hugely important.
Great, thanks. And Rabia, what would you say the two things, if you were to suggest two things to the global solidarity movement with the Palestinians, what would those two suggestions be?
I think it's very important for us as Palestinians not only to lift people or parties, because that's actually one of the mistake we have been done. This is a cause for humanity, and I think special when you want to boycott, to make a bigger effort on boycotting Israel. It's very important that it's not only about an agenda for left people. It's an agenda for everyone. If I want to say something for the solidarity, I think it's very, very important that we are working together, because I think that's very important that we are working together in partnership, and there is to be very clear about the agenda. I think that will be the main goal of how we can succeed with that work.
And Dr. Azam, your two suggestions for the global solidarity movement with the Palestinians.
Well, let's divide this into two departments.
Let's do that.
BDS is one type of solidarity, because BDS has a specific objective: boycott, divest, sanctions, to get Israel to comply with international law, with international norms. I have no problem with this. I think this is great. And if people want to work within that department to achieve such an objective, it's very effective, and it's causing a lot of pain for the Israelis and their supporters around
Just
the world.
like it did to the apartheid South African regime, for sure.
But of course, it shouldn't espouse a solution to the problem. It would be a mistake to say we want a two-state solution or a one-state solution. I think they should just restrict themselves to compliance with international law, with international norms, and leave the rest to others. Now, the other department is the political department. Those who wish to express solidarity politically with the Palestinians will have to work the agenda, or according to the agenda of the Palestinians, and not invent an agenda for the Palestinians.
Well, is there an agenda for the Palestinians? I mean, it seems there are several agendas for the Palestinians. Depends who you talk to. So an agenda that you might espouse might not be espoused by another Palestinian. So maybe I would, if I can modify your suggestion, to just have the solidarity movement be in solidarity with the Palestinians on the merits of their issues. That is, to get rid of the occupation as the root cause of all problems and all evils in the Middle East, to institute boycotts, divestment, and sanctions against the Israeli occupation, the cultural boycott and every kind of boycott. That would be fine. And then to leave the solutions alone. But if we want to say, leave the agenda to be set by the Palestinians, I'm afraid they're going to be half a dozen agendas that are set.
No, the majority of the Palestinians don't disagree on what they want. Probably the political elite have these differences, and that is starting from the 10-point document of Fatah in the early 70s, leading up to the Oslo Agreement. And that is considered to be a deviation from what the Palestinians always wanted.
I would say it's a blasphemy. Blasphemous rather than deviation.
Blasphemy, and it's apostasy, whatever you want to call it. Now, what I would suggest, if people want to be involved politically with the Palestinian issue, don't try to impose on the Palestinians what you think is workable, because that's not how it works. Probably the struggle against apartheid in South Africa is a good parable, is a good example to follow. We want to end apartheid in Palestine. And apartheid in Palestine is represented by Zionism.
By the occupation, right.
By Zionism.
Zionism.
You see, I slightly beg to disagree with you that occupation is not, that Zionism is not a tool of occupation. Occupation is the tool of Zionism. Because the idea started in Europe with Zionism claiming to possess a land that belongs to somebody else.
Well, maybe you and I agree more than you think, because I said Zionism is the vehicle for the occupation. I mean, the occupation needed a vehicle that is a mindset, a thought that is Zionism, but this is semantics anyway.
No. Zionism is the original idea. Zionism is the idea that says that a Jew is superhuman and a non-Jew is subhuman. That cannot be accepted. Even if a Muslim claims to be superhuman,
we don't accept that.
We don't accept that. Yeah. Why should the world today accept that the Jews are superhumans? They are not. They are just ordinary human beings.
And that is with the advent of political Zionism. Now, I wanted to ask the two Europeans, even though you still call yourself Palestinian, but you seem more of a European now, or as much of a European as you are Palestinian. You happen to be completely European. So my question to you is there hypocrisy in the West? Generally in Europe in particular, of course, we're not going to talk about my country, the United States of America, which is superior in that department. For example, the home demolition, the abuse of Palestinian children almost daily. The videos are surfacing day after day after day about these kind of abuses. And you find that overall the European populace is more concerned with the feeling of the Israelis, and particularly the Jews, probably about the guilt, about what happened in during the horrendous times of the Holocaust in World War II, that Europeans are still feeling that guilt, that they do not want to criticize Israel as forcefully as they would have if it was somebody else who is committing these kind of atrocities. So from a European paradigm, do you feel that Europe is somehow not as courageous as it can be, or maybe hypocritical if you want to be harsh? Go ahead, either one.
Absolutely. I mean, it's pretty obvious for those who really follow what the EU's positions are, that they are being hugely hypocritical in, and the main issue with I think with a lot of the EU's position is they say one thing, but then they do something completely different. They say they support the two-state solution, they support, they're against home demolitions, they're for international law. But when you go and look at the actions, there is nothing that backs up their words. They're not even willing. Israel continues every year to demolish homes built with EU funds, and the EU cannot even bring themselves to hold Israel accountable to get this money that is European taxpayers' money back. And you see this played out in many different scenarios, whether it is accountability, whether it is at the UN. Recently, as PRC, we've been working at the Human Rights Council, and they say to you they're against the settlements, and they're against doing business in the settlements, but then they don't support mechanisms like the database that would list European companies doing business with the settlements. And so I think it's very important to hold Europe accountable for to challenge them on their rhetoric with actually their actions, which is, as mentioned already, and for many reasons historical, whether it is the continued economic relationship that there is. There is this deep rooted alliance, and which is also rooted in the fact that Israel is a colonial project, and while most of Europeans' projects have ended, Israel's is still ongoing, but I believe there is this relationship that it brings them closer together.
And Rabia, what do you think? Are the Europeans being hypocritical? Are they being just a little bit reserved when it comes to the support? Or, I mean, sometimes they would support the Palestinians, but they're not willing to criticize Israel, as if what is happening to the Palestinians is almost self-inflicted. So how do you see it?
I think it's both, because it's about, there is many politicians who actually know exactly what's happening. And even though accepting what's happening in Palestine, even every day they are seeing suffering, every day they are seeing what the Israeli occupation is doing. But I think there is many people in the Western Union, Western world, also here in Europe, who's actually know something about what's happening in Palestine. And what they know is, some of what they know is actually through the media. And we are not very successfully working with the media in Europe. There are a lot of the most and strongest media in Europe, and also here in Denmark. They are very supportively of Israel. They are not actually not bringing what's happening in Palestine every day, so every Danish would understand and see what's happening. They will see when there is some Israeli has been killing and something has been bombing. And if you ask them, why are you not bringing a story about that Palestinians are suffering today? And we do that as Danish Palestinian here in Denmark. They will say, but that's actually what's happening every day, so why should it be a story? And what I think we need to do is, this is an important work for the civil society, is actually to communicate much more. We should also know that Palestine is very big and a lot of things for us, but it's not everything for many people. Many people, many Danish and European, Palestine is actually a part of a big world. And there is many struggles and problems. So they are not maybe very, they don't know everything what we know about Palestine. And that's why, not because they don't want to support us, but I think because there are many people who's actually manipulated through some of the hypocritical politicians and the media. And that's why our work with, in the solidarity movement, very important.
Taking that argument forward, that some are holding back, but many are ignorant. And I believe that. I believe that the majority of the people, because of the pervasive pro-Israel media coverage of the conflict, you find many Europeans and many in the United States, generally in the West, they'll tell you this is a complicated issue. But you and I know it is not complicated. So Dr. Azam, let's end with that. If you can, for somebody who's listening to us, who's just not sure, who thinks it's complicated, who thinks, well, I'm not sure I want to support the solidarity movement. I sympathize with the Palestinians, but I'm kind of on the fence. So would you make the case for Palestine? Would you make the case for the solidarity movement? Would you make the case for those who think that this conflict is complicated? And would you win them over for us? That's a short order, you know,
well, in
3 minutes or less.
They're telling us time is up.
Okay.
So I wonder whether we need another workshop maybe. But very quickly. You see, I was once giving a lecture in one of the London universities. I was challenged by some of the Israeli students in the crowd. And I said to them this: go to the library next door. Just read. Read about the history of the region. Read about the history of Europe since the middle of the 19th century. And you'll find the facts. The facts are there, but people don't go to them. But what I'm really worried is not about the people we can reach. We have to try and reach the people. What I am worried about is the liberal democratic system itself. Liberal democracy has built-in flaws. and the most serious flaw is that your objective in a liberal democracy is to win a seat, to win office, and that is through election. And you do whatever it takes to win. And the Zionist lobby is still in the United States of America and in much of Europe is holding fast on the balls of every politician in these countries. They don't dare go against the Zionist lobby because they want to get to office, and the road to office is controlled by the Zionist lobby.
Well, except in the United States, we were able to break that cycle, and we elected the first Palestinian Muslim member of Congress, Rashid Tlaib. So at least we have had that success. We wish you the same success in Europe. Thank you very much, everyone, for your good listening. We appreciate our distinguished panel for this insight that they gave us on the global solidarity movement with the Palestinian people. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.